Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. We could all use a little humor these days. Our guests joining me by Zoom are distinguished civil servants who have long relied on humor to support their work. And they've co-authored a book to celebrate Vermont humor entitled I Could Hardly Keep From Laughing. Bill Mayers has been a reporter, photographer, state legislator, high school teacher, and author or co-author of 18 wide-ranging books. Don Hooper has been a Peace Corps volunteer, farmer, legislator, and Vermont Secretary of State. He is a conservationist, principal cheerleader of the family business, Vermont Creamery, and a darn good illustrator. And here are the real guys. Welcome, Bill and Don.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, Fran.
So let's start with what Vermont humor is. What defines it and makes it unique, Bill?
Well, I think the best way to do this is to read what Jeff Danziger, a great Vermont cartoonist and humorist, wrote in the foreword to this book. And he said, what Vermont humor is best defined by what it is not. It is not cruel. It is not transient. It is not self-amused. It is not loud or slapstick. It started with farmers' jokes because this has been a farming state its entire life. But Vermont humor isn't all farmer wit. Most of what's funny here is the acceptance of how things are and why, given the initial difficulties of weather, rocky soil, shortages, and economic desiccation. People stay here. Most of what's in this book shows a background evaluation of what really matters in life. The funny stuff is on the surface, but you have to be there to see why it is really funny. In a way, it defies description, except to point out that Vermonters find each other amusing, even when they don't say anything.
and that cartoon of Don's that we just had up was kind of inspired by the title I Could Hardly Keep From Laughing, which was the Mark Twain story. So quickly the title of the book and why you came up with that.
Well, Twain was visiting Brattleboro long ago, 100 years ago, and the Vermont audience was so unresponsive that he got kind of churlish about it. He got mad. He closed up early and he changed his costume and he went around to the front of the theater and he said, "Hey, what's going on in there?" And this guy is getting in his buggy with his wife and he says, "Oh my God, yeah, Mark Twain was in there. He was so funny we could hardly keep from laughing." So it didn't impress, the Vermont Reserve didn't impress Twain, but it has characterized our kind of not laugh out loud humor for a long time.
Well, and here's one, the fork in the road. If you come to a fork in the road, you really ought to take it. Feels very Vermont.
That's nothing but sort of joyous, playful. It harkens back to Robert Frost, our favorite poet. And it's kind of goofy, at least the drawing is. And it's just fun wordplay. It doesn't hurt anybody. And it's kind of amusing.
Well, and the next one, Big Rig, it's a terrific illustration. And Don, it's hard to believe that you first published this is your first published work with illustrations. Have you always been cartooning?
Well, I picked it up in the legislature. You know, everybody has an opinion about just about every issue that comes up. And I thought, well, the more you get up, the less influence you actually have. So I started to do sketches. When we do a topic like lobbyist disclosure, I would draw a streaker who was and make it lobbyist exposure. But this Vermont rig, he says, and another thing, they try to tell you the days are getting longer in January. That's a total crock.
well,
and a Vermont rig is someone who's so unique and comfortable in his or her own skin that they basically get away with murder. And you know the expression, "I'm from Vermont and I do what I want." That's a Vermont rig.
Yeah. So weather, and certainly this is about weather. Weather is always a good theme for humor in Vermont. Bill, we have snow as a tourist attraction here and some other things, but what about weather and humor? And of course there's mud season as well.
Well, some people would say that in Vermont, weather is like sex. It's not a joke. But Hooper has a follow-up to this.
Well, the archetypal deadpan Vermont uh, dry humor is Grandma, think it'll rain? And she responds, be an awful long dry spell if it don't. So it took me years to even get that joke, but now I do, and I like it a lot.
This book is not just funny. It's also a history and a collection of Vermont humor. So Bill, I think you were interested in making a book that collected things. So has Vermont humor changed in your lifetime or over the 50 or 100 years that you span this book?
Oh, yes, very much so. Well, I was trained as a historian, and I taught history, and it's easier to think in decades or more about the development of things. And certainly, Vermont humor has gone from largely rural farmer-based humor, and then Don and I were participants in the great change when the Flatlanders came to Vermont and overwhelmed the native Vermonters. And Frank Bryan and I made a figurative fortune out of that with our book on Go Vermonters, Go Milk Goats. Well, then it didn't stop changing, and now we're in a place where there's a lot of stand-up comics around the state in different venues, and their jokes are about today. They're not farmer jokes. So yes, I mean, all history evolves, and we're happy to have documented some of it.
Right, it's awesome. And you were both in the State House. You're both legislators. We have a comment of Chet and Vern on the bathroom floor of the State House. Don, how important was humor when you were in the legislature, and how does humor help in politics?
Well, you take so many divisive, controversial topics, and sometimes the only way I think you can get someone who's maybe like a climate denier or someone who's an anti-vaxxer to take in new information is to make it humorous, and that ends up becoming it doesn't level the playing field. It just makes it acceptable to embrace or at least attend to an alternative viewpoint without getting mad about it.
Right. You have a climate change, the cow and the polar bear, number 10 here, which this is very serious stuff, but it gives it another perspective.
Well, I worked for a long time. It's an issue that I'm particularly concerned about, that we're on a collision course. This is going to be a catastrophic business, climate change, and how to do something that matters in time to actually change the course that we're on. So you think climate change is a bad thing? Asks the Holstein of the polar bear.
Yeah. So you were talking about how, Bill, how things have changed in tradition. I remember very fondly Representative Danny Gore or Norm Lewis. There's a beautiful cartoon here. But of course, in the book, you bring many more contemporary artists and comics. Rusty DeWeese and Josie Levitt, who are also performers. Do they follow a tradition?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it starts, in part with this guy, this Robert Davis, who we used his booklet on Vermont humor, and we don't really know much about him except he wrote this booklet which had no publishing date, no publisher, and no place of publication. But it's full of wonderful farmer jokes, and so he starts a tradition. Then Alan Foley, who taught at Dartmouth, he went around as the old timer collecting stuff, and Danny Gore. He made a career, a post-education career, out of going around and Norm Lewis as giving talks on contemporary issues. I mean, he was amazing at being able to take a stack of newspapers and flip through them and make something funny out of a headline, just right on the spot. I mean, he had just a an incredibly sharp mind that went quick, and people loved it. And he was a perennial candidate for governor, and he created this fictional community called Avery's Gore up in the Northeast Kingdom.
Right.
And then then there was Francis Colburn, who taught at UVM, taught art, but he was a good humorist who picked up things. So yeah, so we hope that people will say in 100 years, well, the tradition included these two yo-yos from the 21st century.
Well, speaking of picking things up, there are certainly memorable characters in the book and cartoons. Bubba, and Norbert, and Ezra, and Wilbur. There's lots of wordplay in your work. Do you guys just see and hear things a little bit differently than us mortals? Like, here's like this one. The stakes are just too high.
But I would say that, I remember just thinking that Chet and Vern were the perfect names for custodians at the State House. But as for thinking differently, Hooper is far, far beyond me in his imagination.
That's very sweet. By the way, the caption for the duck in the boat was "Get all your duck in a row." I don't think it comes up on the screen anyway.
Right.
The other one, the stakes have always been higher since we were in the food business. The stakes are often.
Indeed, and we just ran out of time. I am so sorry. Thank you both for bringing us a little bit of humor today, and for all that you've done for the state of Vermont.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, great.
Their book is "I Could Hardly Keep From Laughing," an illustrated collection of Vermont humor.
That's good.
Thank you so much for joining us across the fence today. I'm Fran Stoddard. Keep laughing and stay well.